When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, there were no pictures of planets other than those taken from a telescope from the Earth shooting through miles of atmosphere. And there's a lot of conjecture about what the dark side of the moon looked like, or whether the lines that appeared in fuzzy photographs made from Earth and Mars were canals made by an extinct civilization on that planet. In 1976, the Viking mission sent up an orbiter and a lander that made high-resolution pictures of the surface of Mars. Around 1972, the Landsat program got started, and the whole planetary photography enterprise began full strength. JPL had learned how to image process the images being sent back from space. It could provide a very detailed map of the entire surface of Mars, and so it was a watershed moment that enabled us to finally see what our own planet looked like and the other planets in the solar system. These images really fascinated me, and so I've been interested in remote sensing and planetary photography, and especially Landsat photography of the Earth ever since. My show, The Human Imprint, is derived from that first idea about whether the lines on Mars were actually human-made or some other process. And it wasn't until we had these high-resolution photographs that we could determine that it wasn't the result of a ruined civilization. In fact, there was no evidence of any human or familiar presence on Mars at all. If you sort of flip that whole concept, if we were living on Mars and we were looking at the Earth and trying to figure out what was going on there, and had managed to send a probe from Mars to the Earth to explore it, these are the images that we would get from that enterprise. This is the Bingham Canyon copper mine. It's a mile deep, and it's just one of examples of the terraforming that we've done on this planet to accommodate our own needs. I call this show The Human Imprint because it's basically the way we've altered and terraformed the planet during our time here since the invention of agriculture about 12,000 years ago. Agriculture is the largest consumer of fresh water. And as you can see, the water courses through these fields becoming more and more narrow, restricting the habitat possibilities there, and also restricting wildlife's migration patterns through there. And so as we squeeze these channels down, we're affecting what can live there and basically reducing the habitat and the wild nature that has evolved there in place of our own needs. And so in that way, we're negating natural selection and introducing human selection. This is another example of how water is inextricably linked to our well-being and habitat. This is rice cultivation in the Sacramento River Valley of California. Rice is a crop that needs a huge amount of water, and of course California doesn't have a lot of it, so it's really not an appropriate crop to be growing in California. But the patterning is rather gorgeous, and that's one of the things that attracted me to satellite imagery from the beginning. At first, when I saw the images, I didn't know what they were. I was kind of mesmerized by them. They looked like abstract expressionist paintings. But upon closer examination and with a little bit of additional information, it became clear what these images were. This, in a way, looks like a Mondrian to me. This is a shot from Iceland. In Iceland, they have many glaciers and volcanoes. They never know when a volcano is going to erupt and cause a huge flow. And so they have, over the years, created a system of dikes and levees to control the unexpected flow of water and manage it successfully. The image just struck me as gorgeous because of the natural curvilinear structure along with the diagonals that the levees and dikes represent. And this is a bridge or a viaduct across one of the stream flows. This is a reservoir in Turkmenistan, and upstream from this apparition appearing flow is a fertilizer plant. And this is the industrial outflow from the fertilizer plant, their waste discharge. And it's built up over the years, which keeps creating its own shape and channel. The reason the water is so green here is the fertilizer plant is putting nutrients into the reservoir, and the nutrients are going wild and reproducing and turning the water completely green, and at the same time using up all the oxygen in the water. So the water becomes anoxic, and regular marine life can't live there. This is a very high resolution image of the Burning Man festival held in Black Rock Desert, Nevada. Most years it hasn't been held for the last couple of years because of the pandemic. This is from 2013 when the attendance was in the 70,000 neighborhood. People come for a week, create camps, and spend a week in the desert. And it's just an example of sort of our tribal tendencies, and it's a temporary mark on the landscape. After the festival is over, it's cleaned up and the desert goes back to looking pretty much the way it looked before. The nice thing about it is it's there and then it's gone after a while, so it doesn't leave a permanent imprint the way so many of the other activities that we practice do. Unfortunately, a lot of the activities that we participate in here are extractive activities, meaning that we take something that can't be reintroduced. The most egregious example of that is clear-cut logging. And the fossil fuel industry takes a lot of the heat for creating climate change and global warming. However, the real culprit is the timber industry, because they're deforesting gigantic tracts of the planet. And when you remove the trees, there's nothing to slow the wind down. And what gets planted in place of the indigenous forest that's being removed are tree farms. And the timber industry, the objective of the timber industry is to remove all indigenous forests from the planet and plant tree farms that will ensure their profitability in perpetuity. They would like to convince you that forests can be recreated, which is simply not true. Indigenous forests are the result of thousands of years of evolution. They have a means of communicating underground with a mycological network, and they support each other. So in a way, it's like a gigantic living organism. Trees are the most effective climate change mechanism that we have. They sequester carbon as they grow, and they emit oxygen. Those are two things that we desperately need to control the climate that we rely on to live as humans. And so removing these indigenous forests is probably the most destructive activity that we're engaged in from an extractive standpoint. Another extractive industry, of course, is the hydrocarbon industry, which is drilling and fracking, and mining to the extent that coal is being used as an energy source. This is a fracking field in Upton, Texas. Fracking involves drilling a grid and then injecting chemicals with fine-grained sand under pressure into the hole to spread the rock layers apart and keep them apart so that the gas and oil can be pumped out of there. It's become a huge source of natural gas, and so we're switching over from really polluting fossil fuels like coal to natural gas. Unfortunately, natural gas is no cleaner than coal because a big component of natural gas is methane. And the methane the extractive industry allows for 30% of the natural gas that gets drilled to be lost into the atmosphere in the form of methane, which is 20 times more polluting than the CO2 that your tailpipe emissions. These fracking grids cover vast territories in areas where people have allowed them to happen. Unfortunately, extractive companies usually come into an area where there is something that they want. They provide local jobs to the local people until that resource is exhausted, and then they pull up and leave. And the people who've made their home there are sort of stuck there, and suddenly they don't have a job. And on top of that, there's a gigantic mess, which oftentimes the company doesn't bother to clean up. This is an image of the battlefield east of Homs, Syria. This is an imprint that is a result of conflict and war between bands of humans, basically. And as you can see, the whole ground is covered with soot, particulate debris from oil fires. There are craters from explosions. There are combat engineers and bulldozers come and scoop out the earth so that gun placements can be placed in them and be out of the line of fire by being below ground level. So this is just a set of imprints that basically show what conflict does to the planet. This image, it's a composite of probably 40 or 50 satellite images placed end to end in columns and rows of the Nevada test site, Yucca Flats, and just north of Las Vegas. There were, I think, 958 underground nuclear device tests performed here, and each one of these little divots in the surface of the dry lake area is an underground test. Each one of those underground tests probably cost the American taxpayers about $1 billion, and there are almost 1,000 of them just in this valley. I would also mention, I've been kind of fascinated by this area and always wanted to make a picture, and I've flown close to it, but the airspace was restricted, so it was so far off I couldn't make any kind of a decent photograph. And it wasn't until the Landsat archive became public domain in 2008 that I could go and just collect the images and put together my own picture of this. This is a video piece that I call Extraction. It's really a combination of about 6 short video pieces having to do with the extractive industry, the most egregious ones anyway. It starts off with the timber industry and the deforestation of large swaths of Canada, and then graduates to the same thing in Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. Included after that is the mining, open pit mining, then evaporation surface mining, then fracking and drilling, and finally the processing of that, the refining.